Foxconn wants to build a massive plant in Wisconsin, and taxpayers are being asked for massive incentives to bring it here. We'll take a look at what the announcement means from an economic and political perspective. Meanwhile, in Washington, Republicans have been tied up in knots over what to do about Obamacare. We'll try to untangle that all for you. We'll also update you on where the state budget stands in Madison, and take a look at Police Chief Edward Flynn and his battles with aldermen and the Milwaukee Fire and Police Commission. All of that today, plus winners and losers from the state's best political team on JS on Politics.
This is a great day for America. It is a great day for Wisconsin, and it's a great day for Foxconn. Today, we're announcing the single largest economic development project in the history of the state of Wisconsin and one of the largest in the history of this country. $10 billion, which will create 13,000 jobs in the state of Wisconsin. In turn, the state of Wisconsin, to fulfill that commitment, our partnership with Terry and the Foxconn team will invest $3 billion in economic incentives to make that partnership go forward. And these are exciting times.
Well, welcome to our show today. I'm your host, Greg Borowski. That was the scene yesterday in Washington. We'll have another scene this afternoon at the Milwaukee Art Museum as the road show comes to town. I'm joined today by Bill Glauber, Dan Bice, and from Washington, D.C., Craig Gilbert. Craig, let's start with you. You were at this event yesterday at the White House. Give us a sense of what it was like and what, how significant is this for jobs, the economy, politics, and so forth.
So it's potentially, obviously, hugely significant depending on how it pans out. I mean, two things struck me about the event at the White House yesterday, the big blue ribbon event and celebration of this jobs announcement. One was sort of seeing the famous sort of big three Republicans from Wisconsin, Ryan, Walker, and Priebus, up there with Donald Trump, with whom they've all had a kind of crazy up and down tangled history, all coming together around this announcement, consequential announcement about bringing jobs back to the Midwest. And the other thing is this has been an unbelievably chaotic week for the White House, and that's saying a lot in this White House. You've got controversies over infighting among the White House staff, including Priebus. You've got fights over Jeff Sessions, the AG. You've got turmoil over health care and other kind of controversies and eruptions. And here was this event that kind of suggested what might have been for this White House if they could just sort of focus on the blocking and tackling and executing, because this was something, that they really, the kind of thing they've really been wanting to brag about. And yet it was happening. It was partly overshadowed by all the anarchy in Washington this week. It provided a little bit of an oasis from all that noise.
Yeah, well, speaking of blocking and tackling, we're not going to get into the Packers starting training camp, but let's bring in Dan and Bill here on sort of this issue now comes front and center to Wisconsin, especially in the legislature and probably at city councils and things across the southeast Wisconsin of how do you pass these incentives, how do you get all the other things done. If you're a state lawmaker right now and you see this price tag of the per job it's going to bring in to provide all this, how do you respond?
This is Scott Walker's administration. This is the way he runs things. No taxes, heavy borrowing, and corporate welfare. Those are three parts of the program, and this is the corporate welfare part. It's a lot of money, $3 billion. We found out today that they only get the $3 billion if they create 13,000 jobs, and that's been an issue for Foxconn. They've made promises in other places and not delivered. In Pennsylvania, a $50 million project didn't happen. In Indonesia, I think it was a $1 billion project. Nothing happened. India, a major announcement, very much like ours, and nothing happened there. So people are already counting their chickens, but it seems like we've still got a long way to go.
Yeah, well, Bill, even Republicans have been anti-corporate welfare, right? So you say there's this big giveaway to get these guys in the state. How do you react?
This is about 50 times greater than any other incentive package in the history of the state. It's a large number to swallow. Walker is claiming there's clawback provisions. I'm going to watch very closely how the Senate Republicans handle this. This sort of the Dewey Strobels, Frank Lassay types, and that led Steve Nass who fancy themselves fiscal conservatives.
Budget hawks.
Yeah, budget hawks. See how they react. At the same time, they should be able to draw some Democratic votes for this in the state Senate. But state Senate Democrats, I don't even know if they can negotiate with themselves, let alone with Walker. So it's an interesting political mix. I mean, just the size of this thing, it's the size of Shorewood. That's the amount of property we're talking about. 13,000 jobs, which is an extraordinary number. There's only 5.8 million people who live in this state, so you're adding 13,000 jobs. That's a lot of jobs for a state
Let
this
me ask you,
size,
bring in
if
Craig.
it happens.
Yeah, I mean, these deals don't happen overnight, but this one certainly seems to have emerged very quickly, and it's presumably a huge political win for Scott Walker, who's running for governor next year. And where does this help Donald Trump in 2020 in terms of the state? And
some very important Republicans have a massive political investment in this project. I mean, obviously, Scott Walker, more than anyone else, one of his vulnerabilities has been the state's chronically slow job growth. It has a very low unemployment rate, as we know, but it's been growing jobs at about half the national rate. This, for him, could be a very effective answer to that if things pan out. Donald Trump has a huge political investment. It's in a state, obviously, that he turned, and it speaks to sort of his big selling point. I'm going to revive blue-collar jobs, especially in the Midwest. Paul Ryan has a big political investment in this. It's his congressional district. He's going to have a more legitimate, formidable challenge. He's certainly the favorite for re-election, but this potentially is an answer for him to Democratic opponents who say he's ignored his district and gone national. So natural questions about whether the reality is going to be there in the end for this project, but at the same time, a president, a House Speaker, and a governor who have a huge political stake in making this thing happen.
In the last two elections, Scott Walker's been dogged by one particular issue, and that is his promise to create 250,000 jobs in his first term, and he didn't get it done. This doesn't address that completely. This is, 5% of that figure, but it gets him in that direction. When people bring up the issue, he can always redirect, I'm assuming, next year and point to this project going forward.
Well, he's also trying to fold in the fact that, right to work, played a role in this, and, the budget played a role in this. So he's trying to throw everything into the pile.
And Amazon's adding a bunch of jobs, too, so...
Yeah, well, let's leave the jobs discussion there for a moment and turn now to one of the other jobs in Washington they've been trying to get done this week, which is in the Senate to try to get something passed on repealing Obamacare. Craig, can you give us a sense of where that's at and what we expect to happen over the next few days?
So they've cycled through some plans where they didn't have the votes among Republican senators to pass, so there's some disarray. And some disappointment certainly on the Republican side, but they're kind of seem to be coalescing around this idea of what's called a skinny repeal, which is basically rolling back two mandates in Obamacare and one tax, and not including the Medicaid cuts, not doing a lot of the other things that they've been talking about doing that they want to do, because this may be all they can get the votes for. And it's really not a plan. It's really just a vehicle for passing something that gets them into negotiations with House Republicans where they go back to the drawing board if that happens, and then they've got to try to find a deal, which, again, none of this resolves the fundamental divisions and disagreements within the Republican Party over what to do about health care, but at least it keeps the process alive if they can pass the so-called skinny repeal, and then you have negotiations, and then whatever comes out of that would still have to be passed again by both chambers.
Yeah, well, Bill, let me ask you, because you've covered Ron Johnson a lot in his Senate races and things. He's been kind of the Hamlet on this, where he's sort of kind of wants something, doesn't, and he's one of the final votes the other day to even start debate. Where do you see him coming down on this? What would satisfy him to get him to support a plan?
He's very conservative on this issue. He ran against Obamacare. That was the whole meaning of his campaign in 2010. But he is. he's articulated several things. One is not repeal and replace, but repair Obamacare. We need Democrats. Yet at the same time, he gets upset if there aren't more Medicaid cuts. That McConnell was sort of double speaking on those Medicaid cuts. So I'm not so sure he's figured out where he is, nor have the Republicans. I'm astonished. I thought when Obamacare was passed that the Democrats really didn't have a plan. Well, the Republicans really don't have a plan. It's astonishing. It's not out. There's no there.
What's interesting about Ron Johnson, too, is while everybody else has to figure out the political landscape, he doesn't have to. He's a lame duck senator, has said he's not going to run again, apparently doesn't have to run again, so he can be his own person, and right now that person's a little bit schizophrenic. We haven't figured out where he's going to land on that. I was at a town hall meeting where he discussed, and several people who were going to lose their Medicaid benefits were saying, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I vow we will not pull the carpet out from underneath you." And I was like, "Well, you were just talking about how we needed to cut back on Medicaid." So I'm not really sure he's figured it all out.
Yeah, so Craig, if you're a Democrat in Washington, D.C. right now and you're seeing this go on, what is it going to take to get, as Donald Trump will blame the Democrats, they're not in control, but what will it take to get them to negotiate, if at all? Or is it just, hey, you didn't help us, we won't help you?
They're not going to negotiate any kind of a deal that they see as an attempt to sort of, quote, undo Obamacare. They would only be willing to negotiate tweaks to Obamacare to make it work better. One final note about Ron Johnson is this so-called skinny repeal, which may end up being the Republican vehicle in the Senate that gets them to a conference with the House, really doesn't do any of the things that Ron Johnson wants to do. It doesn't cut Medicaid. It doesn't stabilize the insurance markets. He may end up voting for it anyway, again, just to keep the process alive.
How do you, Dan and Bill, how do you think this has been playing among voters in Wisconsin when say Donald Trump says, hey, it's the Democrats are at fault, or it's this person, but
the odd thing is the landscape's changed dramatically since 2010 when Ron Johnson was saying he wanted to get rid of it. The majority of voters were agreeing with him, saying Obamacare is not working, it needs to be replaced, and now there's strong support in Wisconsin for Obamacare. I mean, they favor some changes and stuff. So, it's a tricky thing to try to figure out where you're going to be. And I think that's part of the difficulty right now, because there are so many people who've depended on it and are relying on it. To take it away is a very difficult thing.
What do you think, Bill?
I don't know. I know the polls say that Obamacare is now more popular than it was before, and that Trump Care, or whatever version the Republicans come up with, is not very popular. I don't understand what they're doing. And if I don't understand what they're doing and I follow this every day, how is the person who's working 9 to 5 and not following every day supposed to understand this? It is an incredible situation that's going on in Washington. In many ways, it is completely outrageous. So I think we just have to wait to see what plan, if any, they come up with.
We do know one thing: if it fails, Trump will blame Jeff Sessions and maybe Reince Priebus.
Yeah,
so that's what we
a
know.
good quick segue, Dan. I want to get Craig before he leaves on Reince Priebus and this idea out there that it's been there for a while that he may not be long as chief of staff. But what are you hearing in terms of the immediate future here for Reince Priebus?
Well, it's a rocky moment for him. You've got a new White House communications chief appointed by Trump, who's, had this kind of some ways bizarre interview on cable television, calling Priebus out and suggesting that he was behind a damaging, quote, leaks about him, and we're going to have to wait and see in the next couple of days, whether Trump or anyone else in the administration comes to Reince Priebus's defense, how Reince Priebus does or doesn't respond to it. Everybody's been kind of waiting for the end game in terms of his tenure at the White House. Most people think it's a question not of if, but of when.
All right. Well, we'll leave our discussion on Washington there for today. We're going to shift now to the state budget in this segment, looking at where things stand in Madison.
We're joined now by Patrick Marley from our Madison Bureau to talk about the state budget. So, Patrick, one of the big hang-ups for the longest time has been transportation funding, and what do we do about roads and how to get more built and how quickly and how to pay for them. Has that gotten any closer to being resolved now? What's the update on that?
We seem to be as far apart as ever when it comes to roads. The Senate and the Republicans, the Republicans in the Senate and in the Assembly just have these fundamental disagreements over how we fund roads, how much we borrow. The Assembly doesn't want to borrow anything. The governor tried to find this sort of middle ground there, but the Senate Republicans don't like that plan either.
Yeah, so do you see a resolution coming, or are these two intractable positions that they'll just have to one wear the other one down, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, at some point we'll get a deal. I don't know that it's anytime soon. I think we're weeks away from a budget deal being finalized, because even if they had something in the next couple of days, they'd still have to work it through the Joint Finance Committee, both floors of the houses. So we're a ways off here before we get a final deal. The real question is when they can come up with sort of the framework. Does that happen next week, or does it take them 3 or 4 weeks to come up with that?
Beyond roads and transportation, what would you say is the next biggest topic or two that is where there's disagreements between the chambers?
Yeah, definitely the next sticking point after that are tax cuts. The governor had originally wanted to cut income tax by about $200 million. The Senate Republicans instead wanted to remove the personal property tax, which is a tax that businesses pay on furnishings and equipment. This latest plan from the governor and Assembly Republicans would not have those tax cuts in there. That is a real problem for Senate Republicans and even a problem for some Assembly Republicans. They want to see changes to the personal property tax. Others are saying we just don't have room to make those kinds of cuts.
All right, and let me finally ask, we have this big announcement from Foxconn about them coming to Wisconsin, and there'll be, some very large, massive amount of incentives involved in that. Does this change the debate on the budget at all in terms of over what can we afford or not afford, or what roads need to be done first, or things of that nature?
I think it's actually possible that the Foxconn announcement will speed things up on the state budget, because the state budget has been tying them up for months now. This Foxconn deal is huge. It seems to have support. I mean, we still don't know the details, but there's support out there in the legislature for it. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to move on to that deal, which will probably be separate legislation, and get the budget behind them. It may influence the debate over infrastructure and the importance of having good roads for this new company that could come here. Now, it does give them all something new to fight over, but I'd say the early signs are that this could actually help them finish their budget negotiations.
All right, great. Thanks for that update, Patrick, and I suspect there'll be more updates on the budget as we go forward for the next few weeks. So thanks for joining us.
You bet. Thanks, Greg.
All right, so that was the Groundhog Day segment of our show, where each week Patrick gives us basically the same update on the budget, or sometimes it's Jason, but that's the
change. The
Madison.
face is different. The message is the same.
So, but I want to ask you guys. Okay, let's if you were betting men, and maybe you are, maybe you're not. When will this budget pass? Give me a day when you think it'll be.
The thing to think about, having covered the legislature for 5 or 6 years, is a lot of these guys want to go on vacation. And I think the last thing they want is to have this still hanging around by Labor Day. My guess is that they try to get something done in the next 2 weeks and to push it through quickly, so you've got a couple of weeks at the end of August. So I'll say mid-August, August 20th or so.
August 20th.
I'm not going to give a day, but I agree with Patrick that the Foxconn deal is going to speed everything up. Suddenly an argument over $200 million doesn't seem so huge. And, which is what they're basically arguing over $300 million out of a $71 billion budget.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is there's only so much of the bandwidth in terms of big issues, things you can deal with at one time, right? So if they get the budget put aside, then they can go on to the next thing.
Yeah, so I think it's, mid-August.
Okay, we're going to shift now to closer to home here in Milwaukee with a look at Chief Flynn, who has been on the hot seat and continues there. We're joined now by Mary Spicuzza, our City Hall reporter. Now, Mary, you and police reporter Ashley Lutheran had an interview this week with Chief Edward Flynn. We talked a lot about the protocols of policies and the ins and outs on this immigration order. But what I really want to ask you is, why do you think Chief Flynn wanted to do that interview with us?
I think he wanted to clear the air and get his side of the story out. He told us that he felt like he was being made into a villain, essentially, that this controversial immigration policy change came about. He wanted to make it clear that it was not initiated by him, but said that it was rather the city attorney's office that was going through some federal grant proposals as they were ordered to do by the federal government, and that someone from the city attorney's office actually flagged this as an issue, saying that they couldn't basically certify that the city was in compliance with federal immigration law, partly because the policy, this standard operating procedure, this police policy, had some language saying that police shall not contact immigration officials. And it seems like the big problem was this prohibition saying that a police officer couldn't essentially reach out to federal immigration officials if they thought someone was in the country illegally.
As a big city police chief, it goes with the job to be on the hot seat periodically, but he does appear to be on the hot seat again. When
Especially
you look at
hot
the police
seat
pursuit policy and rumors that he may be out sort of job hunting or at least looking. What's the state of his relationship with Mayor Tom Barrett at this point?
I don't think his relationship with Mayor Tom Barrett is necessarily as tense as it is with, say, the Fire and Police Commission or the Common Council. It was interesting. There was a debate about asset forfeiture, which suddenly morphed, and this was a few weeks ago during a Common Council meeting. It essentially morphed into this indictment of Chief Flynn, how he feels like he's not accountable to them, he doesn't answer their questions. From there, the Fire and Police Commission issued their directive on immigration policy. They issued, immigration pursuit policy. They overrode his immigration policy. The mayor did express some concern about him hiring outside counsel, although it was more kind of confusion that he had reached out to a very prominent Milwaukee attorney, Franklin Gimbel. He said that it was not over a policy dispute over the pursuit policy, but rather that he was concerned there was language in there essentially saying that he could be disciplined or even fired if he didn't essentially just follow the directive and change his policy.
Yeah, let me ask you too, what's your sense of how the chief is viewed by the residents of the city? Because he's got all these other people at work, but then you have stories, as we did over the weekend, of a 6-year-old boy being shot. There's these stories that flare. How do you think people, do you think they feel he's doing a good job, a bad job, a mix?
I would say it's a mix. I think that clearly the Common Council is feeling frustrated, but the Common Council also gets anger when there are crimes in their district, and they feel like they're being held accountable and they want the chief to be held accountable. But I think anytime you have something like, a horrible tragedy with a 6-year-old being shot, that there are a lot of questions being raised, and I would say that would be about the chief, the mayor, the Common Council, about, how safe is our city for a child who essentially was just going to say goodbye to his mom before going on a, fishing trip. So I think something like that, I think that there are probably a lot of questions being raised and a lot of concern just because it's such a tragedy.
All right, well, we'll leave that discussion there, and I'm sure there'll be more about Chief Flynn as this sort of works its way through the process at City Hall. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, so Chief Flynn he's coming up on his 10th year, which is pretty long by big city standards.
I didn't expect him to be around. He probably didn't expect to be here.
When he got here, it was like, oh, you're only coming for, that he wouldn't stay very long. So give me your best guess. A year from now, is Chief Flynn still
a lot
chief
of predicting.
in Milwaukee?
You know how horrible we are at predicting
That's
stuff?
That's why we do this segment.
So you can bring it back?
Yeah.
I do not think he's here in a year. I think he's been here long enough. And, he's a great deal of this is about his tone. He can be, he is a smart guy. He is a funny guy, but he's always, he can be a little condescending in his dealings with people. And I think Mayor Barrett is sort of used to that, and it doesn't bother him. But with other people, when you run into conflict, it just increases and intensifies the disagreement because he's going to say something sarcastic or something along those lines, and it can be very irritating.
He's hired Frank Gimbel as an attorney. Isn't that the end game when you start hiring Frank Gimbel?
Well, I think Frank today is more about negotiating some sort of settlement or exit for him, just like he did at State Fair Park and other times. I don't think he hired him because he needs a criminal defense attorney.
No. But a potential settlement.
So I'm going to put you down for a no.
Well, yeah. What's amazing? I've only been here 11, 12 years, and I'm amazed. He would be the first chief to leave without suing if he doesn't sue. The two previous chiefs left in lawsuits.
Jones, racial discrimination. integrity, gender discrimination, and what would you have with him, do you think?
I don't know. I'm not saying he's going to sue, but I'm just saying this is a tough job and a tough town to be the top cop in. I mean, they all are, but this one in particular.
Yeah, well, this says there's interesting dynamics, too. So the mayor appoints the Fire and Police Commission, the council vote on the members on the commission, and the council wants to be the one to fire the chief, even though they don't hire the chief. It's like,
and remember, they sort of hired somebody to select its chief. So the Fire and Police Commission, they confirmed it, but they had the two consultants go and find Flynn, who didn't even apply for the job. And right now, he's been in there, it seems like, for a long time.
All right, so let's go now to our winners and losers of the week. And Dan, I'm going to have you start with your winner.
It's an easy winner for me. It's Scott Walker. As I said, and actually this is my second week in a row. Last week it was how much money he had raised for his reelection, and then this helps him with his reelection as well. The Foxconn announcement that 13,000 jobs, if it happens, would be a big boost to his credibility in terms of creating jobs.
Yeah. And Bill, let's get your winner.
The other part, when the Trump administration isn't playing Reservoir Dogs shooting each other, they actually had a good moment here for about 20 minutes. It was a good win for Trump. It's his Made in America agenda, his Make America, it's manufacturing, it's the Midwest, it's Make America Great Again, but then they can't help themselves and they get in a Twitter war immediately. So I won't call him a weekly winner, I'll call him a winner for about 20 minutes.
Well, you could say that outside of his appointment to the Supreme Court, that this might have been the second biggest announcement he's had.
To what degree do you think the fact that Wisconsin was a critical state for him plays a role in the planting? Or is it because we're near the lake and they need the water?
I think all of those things come together. It's incredibly helpful to him. He won here by a very small margin, and yeah, this is incredibly helpful. And in case we needed to figure out who was responsible for it, the president told us that this wouldn't have happened if it weren't for him.
Right. So it's important to get that clarity for us journalists. Bill, what's your loser from the week?
Gwen Moore, who I normally wouldn't put in a loser of the week, but she really snubbed the announcement yesterday at the White House, and it just seemed to be sort of pointless and not very courteous. And she should have been there. It was a big announcement, regardless of your politics.
It's not her district, but it certainly would have an impact on her district.
Well, you could have thousands of people. Well, there was.
She didn't want to be a prop.
She didn't want to be a prop, but there could be hundreds, if not several thousand people from the city who get jobs down there, if in fact those jobs materialize.
If Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama were president, I'm guessing she wouldn't have minded being a prop.
All right, so Dan, let's go to your loser from
my loser is Kevin Nicholson, who's announced yesterday, right around the same time all of the Foxconn news was coming out, that he's going to take on Tammy Baldwin for the U.S. Senate. I'm sure that they were hoping for a clear day where he made the announcement, released his bio ad, and then hit talk radio, and that he was the talking point of the day. But instead, he didn't do very well on talk radio, and he frequently is asked his opinions about the Foxconn deal. So it wasn't a great rollout for him.
All right, I'm going to get to two viewer questions this week. The first one I'm going to throw to you, Dan. So this is from Brian from Bayview, who wrote, okay, this means Walker wins in 2018, right? And Trump takes Wisconsin in 2020.
Because nothing happens between now and next year or 2020. We like to say, we like to have these things settled and resolved very early on, just like when President Bush had the response to 9/11 and had a 90% approval rating. We just assumed that,
Well, there was George H.W. Bush, the president's father, after the first Gulf War, 90% approval rating. He was out of office within 2 years.
And the belief was that Hillary Clinton had an insurmountable lead against Barack Obama, and yes, obviously that didn't turn out.
All right, so that's no for Brian, who's checking.
I mean, it's helpful to him, but
he's clearly the favorite. I mean, there's no question about it.
All right, let me ask this question to Bill from Miriam, who says, what are the odds that the GOP can actually pass an Obamacare vote? Will Johnson regret his vote this week? And that was the one to even let it
Johnson will not regret his vote this week.
He's not a guy who has regrets.
And as for predicting what the Republican senators will do, I am going to pass because I don't even think they know what they're going to do.
All right, well, that's a good place to end our show for the week. We'll be back next week at the same time and same location. And we'll probably be talking about the state budget, and I'm guessing Foxconn will come up again, so you won't want to miss it. See you next week.